Hello and welcome back to Privilege Check, a podcast where two girls from different backgrounds come together to unveil the reality of modern society. I'm Loveleen.
And I'm Shivangi. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about something that's been in the news and that has been flooding our Twitter feeds for the entire week. We're going to talk about marital rape and we'll briefly go over the recent Delhi court, High Court hearing, and we'll also talk about what we feel are the problems with, not criminalizing marital rape. So I hope it's clear. Loveleen and I both stand that marital rape should be criminalized. But before delving into that topic, I think it makes much more sense to first explain to our listeners who are probably not aware about this conversation what exactly if the conversation around marital rape right now. So Loveleen, do you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, I'll just briefly give an overview because there are actually years of High Court hearings that you'll have to understand to see what exactly the court stance is right now. But and to give you the facts of the matter. However, you can just understand that currently everybody there's a whole feud about whether marital rape needs to be criminalized or not. And yes, people are actually having an opinion whether it should be. It's a whole question whether it should be criminalized or not. Uh, and there are multiple layers to the conversation, which is what we will be unveiling today through the episode. And in fact, this is going to be a two-part episode wherein we're going to look at the different perspectives of people and also place our own. This particular episode is going to specifically revolve around our opinion and our perspectives. And like Shivangi has already stated, we clearly have the stand that marital rape should be criminalized. And what for people who do not understand the term marital rape, it and to break it down and help you understand that better, it's basically rape that happens within the boundaries of a marriage. So it is a husband raping his wife or a wife raping her husband. And because same-sex marriages aren't legal in India, that's not something that we can delve into anyway. Right. So that just gives you the overview and the surface level gist of the matter. And I think, Shivangi, could you talk about the criminalization of rape in general and the sections related to that?
Yeah, before I go into that, I just want to clear one thing that you spoke about. In so the section 375 of IPC caters to criminalization of rape, right? And there it is specifically that is also a whole other conversation that rape of men by women who have taken into consideration. Can you just give me 1 minute?
Yes. Her outfit is a whole mood.
It's literally all oversized. But yes, where was I? I don't know. Yeah. Sorry for cutting myself off in the middle. But I just wanted to clear one thing. So the entire concept of rape, criminalizing rape in the Indian Penal Code, it only caters to women and not really men being raped by women. So marital rape does not include women raping their husbands because the marital rape as a topic comes under the rape section for IPC, and therefore, if just a non-married, if if a man who's not married to the woman, if a woman who's not married to the man that she's raping, that's still not rape because that still doesn't cover.
Yeah. It's still rape. It's just not penalized.
It's not penalized. So the marital rape in India does not cover that aspect at all. Anyways, coming back to talking about something I just mentioned, which is Section 375 in the Indian Penal Code. That is the section that criminalizes rape. It was also a very, very specific piece of literature where they tell you exactly different ways that rape could be manifested and rape could be interpreted. It's not just like post penetration that they look at. They look at multiple layers. So it's a quite comprehensive until and unless you come to the exception part of the law, where it says that if the rape is done by a man towards his wife, who's like, less than whatever is, who's more than, like whatever is the legal age for marriage, then the rape is not criminalized. And it is not a criminal offense then. And recently, but like Loveleen said before, a multiple high court hearings have been going on about this entire issue, and it's always been in the news how marital rape should be criminalized because every sort of violence is violence that should be, penalized. So recently, also Delhi High Court had a hearing, and that's why it's again in the news, and that's why it's being talked about again. There are two sides to this. If you put it very broadly, there are two sides to this entire argument. One of them is by primarily, if I could just broadly generalize them as feminists, who say that, obviously women should, have the opportunity to accuse their husband of marital rape. If it's not a criminal offense, they can't push those charges. But then the other side of the argument is by a cluster of people like men, the law and everything, and it's broadly like, like let's not do it. A lot of layers to that, which we'll cover in our part 2 of the episode. But we'll talk about the first argument, like that is around marital rape right now. So yeah, Loveleen, do you want to go ahead?
Definitely. All right. So the first thing that we're looking at is, again, High Court and a lot of courts have given these statements, and what we're going to be broadly discussing is just why we believe, and to give you guys an overview, why we believe criminalization of, in this episode actually. Wow, I should just say that sentence again. What we're broadly going to be discussing going forth in this episode is going to be all the reasons why we believe that marital rape needs to be criminalized. All right. And the first thing that we're looking at is the concept of consent. Now, in general, the concept of consent has been very blurred out, and it's been very blurry. And for something as simple as a statement and an affirmation, it is something that has been very, it's been made complex, to say the least. And especially in marital rape, right?
You lagged. You lagged.
Where did I lag?
I actually don't remember. But you were saying, you said the word it. You said the word it, and then you lagged. You were talking about consent, affirmation, and everything like that.
Yeah, for something that can be as simple as an affirmation, consent has been made severely complex, especially in marital rape. The idea of how a person gets consent has been debatable and has been debated in society. Now, what we believe is that silence is not consent, right? You, to know that you have the consent of another person, you need to have some sort of understanding that the person is willing to, right? And what the argument again of the people who say that marriage, or like who say that marital rape should not be criminalized, is that they, when a person is in a marriage, they're already giving their consent. And when women are raped within a marriage, at times it's not even, at times consent isn't even asked. I doubt that it's asked every single time, right? And at times, even when the act of intercourse begins, the woman does not get a chance to place her consent. And at times it just, to say it in a very blunt manner, it just happens, which means that the woman is silenced from having her opinion and is silenced from stating what she wants, which is why we're saying that silence is not consent. It cannot be accepted as consent, which is why we need to have a provision in place for criminalization of marital rape. So that is just the gist of one of the arguments. The other one talks about different layers. So Shivangi, you want to take that or you want to add on to this?
Yeah, I just want to add a brief point before I go on to the other argument. So Also, the idea is that most of the time marital rape is associated with a number of factors that dominate dominates the man's position in the marriage. Now, because of situations like that, where because the man is the earner, the breadwinner, he is quite responsible. In conventional marriages, the man is the breadwinner, and therefore there is a sort of reliance from the wife, uh, you know, uh, on him to just live and survive, right? And when there are these complex kind of dynamics in relationship, it becomes very difficult for the wife to actually, say no to something that the husband wants, because there's an entire guilt, of he does so much for me. I can withstand one forced sexual experience, like I can do that. That is their entire perception. And it's really, really complex because they're afraid and that's why they're silent, but that silence should never be interpreted as consent. And that entire dynamic of, I should do something for him should not exist at all. And I think that sort of, that domination that I'm talking about, right? I think that sort of ties into the second argument around this entire conversation, which is about domestic abuse. So when you look at the numbers of domestic violence in India, I don't even think you need to look at numbers because it happens in every household. It is a very, very common factor of Indian marriages and Indian households. So when you look at that kind of frequency of domestic violence reports, domestic violence complaints, and you realize that on the other hand, you have no law that criminalizes marital rape, which is again a form of violence. It is a form of domestic violence, to be very precise. And when you draw that parallel, you realize that there is no safety that is being guaranteed to women, because the most crucial part, and I would argue, and I have never been in an experience like that, obviously, nor do I know people who've been in that experience. So I can't speak for them at all. But but I personally think that marital rape is the worst form of domestic violence. It's the worst manifestation of domestic abuse. And for women to not have an opportunity to, report that or to complain about that, I think it's just very unfair. I think it just does not make sense why people are still against this.
Absolutely. And like you were saying, how marital rape becomes the highest form of violence, or the highest or the worst manifestation of domestic violence and domestic abuse. Um, while there are a lot many layers of domestic abuse as well, um, I think rape in itself, and I think it is scientifically, I can't remember which study, but there was a study where rape actually impacts almost every aspect of your life, right? And it impacts a person mentally, physically, emotionally, and there are a release of there is a secretion of hormones that actually messes with the entire balance of your body, and and it is literally physical force. So it is a manifestation of the worst a human could um, do to a person. Um, right. It's very difficult to talk about this very weirdly, right? Even though you've not experienced it. It's very weirdly difficult to be sensitive and to find the right words to place arguments for it. So I wonder what it's like to actually be battling this in court when the court is uh, trying to almost disregard, I mean, not quote per se, but when there is an entire segment of society that's completely trying to disregard a problem as a problem. And well, that is a much bigger problem, right? But yes, what we were, instead of going off topic, what we just want to say is that we know that there are multiple layers of rape and rape in general, and then marriage adds another layer and another veil to sort of mask the act of rape. And marriage then manifests marriage as a factor then manifests in such a way that the woman starts to believe, like Shivangi was earlier saying as well, that it is her duty to please the husband, and it is her duty to be there for her husband. And she sorts of takes it on as a responsibility in a very conventional marriage, that if my husband is, doing whatever he is getting me food, he's giving me shelter, he gets me clothes, he's giving me money to run the house, so this is just a tiny bit that I need to do. And a lot of this also comes from, not just traditional gender roles, but also the position of submission that the woman takes on for herself. She builds this perception of herself that she has to be submissive to the man.
But yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. The entire concept of women being thinking that they're inferior, that is also the reason, because when this entire that is also the reason I think that marital rape should be criminalized. Because when the entire conversation about marital rape was happening online, there were a lot of women who came out and spoke about women in their families, who have been a victim to marital rape, but never really consider it to be rape, because for them it is just it's just forced sex, and it's just like a part of one of their duties. So for them, they never really consider their husbands to be a bad person or anything. Like, they never looked at them in that light. In fact, they boasted about their husband in public, that look at my husband's amazing, he never touches me when I don't want him to, when we know the reality of what's happening behind bedrooms, because you are a part of that family. So there are conversations like this is where women don't really consider this as abuse, and they're like, at least he doesn't hit me, because hitting somebody is a crime. So women, by that virtue, know that it's wrong. But because marital rape is not a crime, and it's assumed that consent is given when you're married, because very crudely, like, there's one of the most crude point of views of marriage is also that it's just for convenient sex. Like, that's why you tie the knot. It's not really love, or it's not like zindagi bhar rehna hai, saath fere and saath janam, nothing like that. One of the most crudest arguments about marriage is that it's just for convenient sex. So when you look at that, and you look at how consent is also given when you get married, you realize that women only look at crime. Women only look at categorize things as bad and unacceptable if the law tells you it is unacceptable. And the law always has to reflect on society. And like how Loveleen and I were talking about domestic abuse, frequency of cases, you realize the law is not reflecting what's happening in the societies. I think this is a very, very serious gap in terms of protection given to women. And the entire concept of women, thinking of themselves as objects and not humans, I think that really needs to change. And I really don't think, I don't know what you think about this, Loveleen, but I really think women cannot change uh, how they perceive violence and how they perceive themselves as, unless and until marital rape is not criminalized. Right now, they're not reporting it because there is no provision for it. There is a provision for domestic violence, so they report domestic violence. But I'm so sure it happens to many more women than those who come forward.
I think that's the major problem, that there are no records and there is nothing to keep track of a menace in society, right? And that is, I think, menace is the least menace is the least accurate word right now. It doesn't justify the offense, but um, but I think it makes the point that we really really need something in place. And I don't know how much women can change the perspective of themselves by a law, because I think there are many more layers to society that make them believe their place in society, and there are many more narratives that make them believe their place in a marriage as well, or their perception of themselves. But I do think that a law would help them and give them a jacket to rely on, in case in case their marriage um, isn't a safe space for them. If their marriage if To be very blunt about it, if they face marital rape, and if their husbands, because if their husbands are abusive, they can go to the court for domestic violence, right? But if it is marital rape, I don't think it is justified to minimize it and mask it as domestic abuse or domestic violence. I think it call call it what it is, say what it is. And I think while it may not immediately help them change their perception of themselves in a marriage, I think they will be able to have a jacket to fall back on. And while there are many legal and other aspects and other arguments related to it, I think that is something that we want to cover. And I think that summarizes our stance on the topic. So, yeah, Shivangi, is there anything you want to add?
No, not really. I mean, of course, I have a lot to add, but I think I'll save it for the next section of the episode. Which, by the way, guys, if you weren't aware of, that will be our third episode. So we'll have a privilege take episode first, where we'll like talk about problems or associated with any movie that's popular right now, and then we'll talk about marital rape. So you guys have a week to like read up on something that you took away from this episode. But for now, Loveleen and I are done with talking about this thing. If it felt very surface level to you, it's that was intentional, because we do not, because there is no data, there is no figure. We do not want to make very very strong arguments about this thing. That is our main intention and why we kept it very brief. But we'll have another episode to compensate on whatever we must have missed. But yeah, that's it. That's it. For those who've stayed till the end, thank you for listening to Privilege Check podcast. If you like this episode, then please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on our socials. That's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter at Privilege Check. That's PRIVILEGECHK. If you're watching this on YouTube, then go hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Like and share this video. And here's to an enlightened life.